Picture this: a dimly lit castle in the Carpathian Mountains. Lightning cracks, thunder rolls, and deep inside, a noblewoman prepares her evening ritual. Servants haul in buckets of something thick and red. Not wine, not roses, but blood. She slips into her bath and sighs as though she's just checked into the creepiest spa on TripAdvisor. That's the legend of Elizabeth Bathory, the infamous Blood Countess. Some say she killed hundreds of young women and bathed in their blood to preserve her beauty. Others argue it was one of history's nastiest smear campaigns, designed to topple a powerful woman. Either way, Bathory's story has everything you'd want in a Halloween horror flick. Castles, torture, politics, and one very questionable skincare routine. So lock the doors, grab your garlic, and maybe pour a glass of Merlot. Because today we're diving into the bloody, bizarre, and possibly exaggerated life of Elizabeth Bathory. A noble beginning. Elizabeth Bathory was born in 1560 into one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in Transylvania. Yes, that Transylvania. She had castles, money, and connections to royalty. In other words, she was the 16th century equivalent of being born a Kardashian, but with more land wars and fewer reality shows. Elizabeth wasn't just rich, she was smart. She spoke several languages, studied etiquette, and knew her way around politics. But she also had a reputation for being hot-tempered and maybe a little unhinged. Reports suggest she suffered seizures, possibly from epilepsy, and the medical treatments at the time included bloodletting and rubbing the blood of non-sufferers on the patient. So yeah, her introduction to blood rituals may have been less vampire chic and more medieval science fail. At 15, she was married off to Ferenc Nadasdy, a Hungarian nobleman and soldier. Ferenc's nickname, the Black Knight of Hungary. And no, not the fun Monty Python kind. He was brutal on the battlefield, known for impaling enemies and decorating the countryside with their corpses. If Tinder had existed in the 16th century Hungary, Elizabeth definitely swiped left. Ferenc spent most of his time at war, leaving Elizabeth to manage their estates. And by manage, I mean she ran them like a medieval boss from hell. Servants dreaded her temper, and there are early whispers of cruelty, slapping, pinching, even outright beating those who displeased her. Imagine Miranda Priestley in The Devil Wears Prada, but with a dungeon. Elizabeth also grew up in a family where violence wasn't just common, it was practically a hobby. One of her uncles was rumoured to dabble in Satanism, and her aunt was said to be a practising witch. Family game night at the Bathory house? Probably less Monopoly, more, let's summon the devil and see what happens. Whether or not those stories are true, they added fuel to the idea that Elizabeth was destined to go down in history as a gothic villainess. The bloody rumours begin. When Ferenc died in 1604, Elizabeth, now in her 40s, was left a wealthy widow with sprawling landholdings. That's when things really went off the rails. Suddenly, peasants started whispering about missing girls. Locals claimed young servant women went into the castle for work and never came out. Witnesses later described screams echoing from the castle walls, rumours of torture chambers, and a countess who personally delighted in cruelty. According to these stories, Elizabeth wasn't just punishing her servants, she was butchering them. And then came the legend that made her famous, that she believed bathing in the blood of virgins would keep her young and beautiful. Forget anti-aging serums. Elizabeth was allegedly running Sephora's most terrifying subscription box. The gossip spread like wildfire. Some claimed she killed 80 girls. Others upped the number to 600. 600. That's not a beauty regimen. That's genocide disguised as skincare. The stories are gruesome. Girls beaten with clubs, burned with irons, frozen outside in the snow, starved and bled dry. Elizabeth was painted as a kind of proto-Dracula, except instead of sucking blood, she was bathing in it. Some accounts claim that Elizabeth even had a sidekick in cruelty. A woman named Anna Darvulia, sometimes described as her lover, sometimes as her personal sadistic mentor. Think of her as the Igor to Bathory's Frankenstein. After Anna's death, witnesses said Elizabeth only grew more unhinged, as if she had lost the one person who knew how to rein her in. If true, that adds a whole extra layer of twisted melodrama to the bloodbath. The investigation and trial. By 1610, the rumours had become impossible to ignore. King Matthias of Hungary finally stepped in and ordered an investigation. Soldiers stormed Bathory's castle, and according to reports, what they found was horrifying. Mutilated corpses, imprisoned girls, and torture devices. Elizabeth was arrested, along with 4 of her servants. What followed was one of the most sensational trials of the early 17th century. More than 300 people testified against her. Witnesses claimed they saw her torture or kill victims. Servants confessed to helping her, though of course those confessions were wrung out of them under torture, which is about as reliable as asking someone if they believe in unicorns while dangling them over a pit of fire. The trial transcripts painted Elizabeth as a monster. But here's the thing, there's no direct evidence linking her to bathing in blood. That detail doesn't show up until later, in gossip and sensationalist retellings. And politically, the timing was suspicious. Elizabeth was a widow, immensely wealthy, and controlled land that the crown would just love to get its hands on. Convenient, isn't it? One particularly wild claim made during the trial was that Elizabeth kept a book of victims, meticulously recording the names of the girls she killed. The problem? No such book was ever found. It's like the medieval equivalent of accusing someone of keeping a murder spreadsheet. Was it evidence of her guilt, or just a creepy rumour to make the case sound ironclad? Historians today remain divided, but the detail has stuck in the public imagination, because who doesn't love a serial killer with a planner? So, was Elizabeth Bathory really a sadistic serial killer, or was she the victim of a politically motivated takedown? Historians are still divided. Some see her as one of the most prolific murderers in history. Others argue she was framed, her story exaggerated by men who couldn't stomach a powerful woman running her own empire. Bricked up alive. Whatever the truth, Elizabeth's end was pure Gothic horror. Too noble to be executed, she was sentenced to life imprisonment in her own castle. The punishment? She was walled up in a small chamber. No doors, no windows, just a tiny slot to pass food through. Basically, she lived her last 4 years in a medieval panic room she couldn't leave. She died in 1614, alone in that bricked-up cell. Her body was buried nearby, though later moved, and her exact resting place remains a mystery. Today, the ruins of Countess Castle in Slovakia are marketed as the Blood Countess's Castle. Tourists visit to snap selfies, whisper ghost stories, and maybe check the tubs for stains. And let's talk about that bricked-up punishment for a second. Can you imagine being sealed inside your bedroom and told, "Congrats, this is your life now"? It was a punishment that was equal parts horrifying and theatrical, designed not just to restrain her, but to send a message. Elizabeth Bathory wasn't executed like a common criminal. She was displayed as a noblewoman too dangerous to let loose, yet too high-ranking to kill outright. Her imprisonment was basically a political Instagram post. Look how powerful the crown is. We can cage even the Blood Countess. Legend versus reality. So who was Elizabeth Bathory really? Was she a bloodthirsty monster who turned her castle into a slaughterhouse for skincare? Or was she a wealthy widow brought down by politics, gossip, and the patriarchy? The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. She may have been cruel to her servants, plenty of nobles were, but the whole bathing in blood thing, that might just be Gothic PR spin. And clearly, it worked, because over 400 years later, Bathory is still remembered as one of history's scariest women. Dracula may be fictional, but the Blood Countess lives on as a real-life horror icon. Elizabeth's story didn't just fade into dusty trial records. It bled, pun intended, into folklore, plays, novels, and eventually horror movies. She inspired countless retellings, from Hammer horror films to heavy metal songs. Modern writers have cast her as everything from a misunderstood noblewoman to a full-on vampire queen. In fact, she's often called the most prolific female serial killer in history, even though historians still debate whether she killed anyone at all. That's the power of a good legend. It doesn't have to be true to be terrifying. So, was Elizabeth Bathory Europe's most prolific serial killer, or history's most infamous smear job? Drop your take in the comments below. Was she a vampire countess, or just a victim of very bad press? And if you enjoyed this dive into blood, politics, and spooky legends, hit that like button, subscribe to History's Hot Messes for more scandalous stories, and check out my last video on Europe's vampiric panics. It's the perfect Halloween double feature.